Good morning. Brother Chad Long, Delhi Baptist Church, here with you. We got a great devotional this morning. I'm looking forward to it, and it's going to be a good day. Appreciate the rain. Appreciate another wonderful day that the Lord has made, and let us rejoice and be glad in it. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about how we should rejoice no matter what's going on. And I know that's hard to do, but really we have so much to be thankful for. When we left off yesterday in James chapter 1, the Bible said in James 1 and verse 17 that every good and perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights. Every good thing that happens to us comes from God, and there's so many good things we can be thankful for. And as human beings, we typically focus on the negative. I was watching the news this morning, and I can't turn on the news because it doesn't matter which one I watch. And I rotate around from Fox to One American News to Newsmax, and I catch myself just getting drawn into the stories. I mean, it doesn't matter what they're talking about. One story this morning was talking about Egyptian corpses that were found, mummies or whatever. And then another story I found was about the president being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, I get roped into it. And usually what'll get you latched into the news is unfortunately negative news. I mean, we're just drawn to it. Well, in our lives, there's so much going on that we gravitate toward the negative, or at least if we keep our focus on it, because it's what concerns us. It's not because we enjoy negativity, I don't think. It's just because that's what needs to be addressed. That's what needs to be fixed. That's what if something's good and everything's wonderful, you don't feel like you have to fix it. That's what you want. It's the negative stuff that pulls us in. But in this verse, we're reminded that every good and perfect gift comes from God, and those are things to rejoice about. We have that to be excited about, knowing that God in His goodness and His holiness has done so many wonderful things, from the rain that we got this morning to the birds chirping right outside my office window that I can hear this morning, to sweet little Gideon, my son, just cooing and smiling this morning at me. I mean, there's so many good things we need to be thankful for, and we need to remember where those things come from. And we need to rejoice in everything. I like the rest of that verse. It says, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. I mentioned Sunday in the message. I started to say my message, but it's God's message. I mentioned the fact that Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. See, God doesn't change, and that's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing because it allows us to be able to depend upon Him. If He changed His mind like we do, we'd never know where we stood with Him, would we? But because He doesn't change, we know that He loves us. We know that He still gives us good and wonderful gifts, and He still wants to. He still hears our prayers, and He still answers them. So those are all good things that we need to focus on, and I wanted to start our day with those positive things. But then I wanted to also show you something else that James has to say that I thought was just astounding. Trying to use other words besides interesting. But I like this. Watch verse 18. James said, speaking of God, of His own will begat He us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of firstfruits of His creatures. Now, when you read that, your first inclination is to think about creation itself. But this isn't a reference to creation. Notice the text. He says, of His own will begat He us. Who's us? See, James is writing this letter to Hebrew believers, of which he is one. So if he's speaking just specifically about Hebrew believers, and I think it's all believers, but just speaking about them for the moment, if that's who he's talking to, then the rest of that verse gives you a clue. See, he says, with the word of truth. Well, who is the word of truth? In other words, he begat those believers by the power of Christ, by what Christ did on the cross of Calvary, and then when he was resurrected from the tomb. Now, this is interesting because he goes on to say that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Now, first fruits, and I'm not going to turn there, but in Leviticus chapter 23, verses, 8 through whatever. I actually have a note. Hold on. Where is that at? Leviticus 23, 9 through 14. Again, we're not going to turn there, but that's a reference to the Feast of First Fruits. Now, what First Fruits was it's a dedication to God. It's a type of sacrifice. You take the first of your harvest, first fruits of it, and you offer it to God. You give him from the beginning of it, not from the end. Not the leftovers, not the dregs. You give him from among the best of it. But another reason first fruits was you wanted to see how the crop was coming out, because the first of what you gain from your harvest is an example. Call it a sample. It's just like if you're at HEB and they're trying to sell you something they think tastes real good, and they got somebody in there cooking it up, and they've got it on a little tray there, and they're offering it to you, and this is what you would call the first fruits of that product. And when you walk by, you try it, and you're like, oh, well, if that's good, you can reasonably assume that the rest of what's in that container, that box, or whatever you're selling is going to taste like this. That first fruits is a sample of what's to come. And so was first fruits. In Leviticus 23, they would take of the harvest, offer that to God, and if they did try any of it, it would let them know what to expect from the rest of their harvest. So they'd have something to get excited about, or I guess if it was a bad year, they'd have something to be negative about. But that first fruits, so as goes the first fruits, goes the rest of the harvest. Now, what the Lord's telling us here in this verse in James, of his own will he begat us. Now, if you want to single out the Hebrews here, you can, because that's who this was written to. But by association, this is all believers, because we all get saved the same way. What this means is it started with the Hebrews. They were the first fruits, and as go the beginning of the harvest, goes the rest of it. So in a way, he's talking about us even today. And let me explain. He says, of his will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. So that as examples, or as a sample of what was to come, so is James and his contemporaries to be. They're to be the example for those who would follow, and a sample of what was to come. I'll share it in another place because we're close by. If you turn over to 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 20, I'll read 22 through the end because it all fits. He says, seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren, see that ye love one another with a pure heart fervently. And then he goes on to say, verse 23, being born again. You could take born again and you could apply it to what James just said. Begat he us. Begat he us means born. Created, born again. Same thing he told Nicodemus in John chapter 3. But don't let me lose you there. I'm just saying. 1 Peter 1:23 says, being born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, by the word of God. The same thing James just said. Begat he us by the, how do you word it? By the word of truth. Peter calls it word of God. Word of truth, word of God, same thing. God is truth. Anyway, being born again by the word of God, which liveth and abideth forever. And Peter says, for all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower thereof faileth away. But the word of the Lord endureth forever. And this is the word which by the gospel is preached unto you. Uh, as goes the first fruits, goes the harvest. Well, they were the first fruits in their time. We're the first fruits in our time. And until the Lord comes back, we're to continue to represent what's to come, the millions of Christians who have come to be saved. And we're supposed to continue to spread the gospel so that they will be saved. The Lord is continually sending workers into his harvest. And it's so good to, if you've ever been a part of that process, it's so good to see the fruit thereof. It's just, it's very rewarding. The devil will tell you you're doing no good, but if you go out into the harvest, you'll see the good you're doing. Even if it's not directly your harvest, if you're just working someone else's, it still feels good to see the results of it. And what I mean by that is if you're out visiting and witnessing and telling people about Jesus and you're not the one who introduced them to Jesus, it's still rewarding to know that somebody did, and you have a hand in that because you're helping to bring that in. So whether you planted or watered or whatever. He says, verse 19, he says, wherefore. And wherefore means therefore in a way. Because of this, because we are the first fruits of his creation, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Now, this one steps on my toes a little because I'm quick sometimes to speak when I need to be swift to hear and slow to speak. Because as first fruits, we're examples. We're the sample that people are following after, and we need to leave them a good example. And so one of the ways that we can do that is to watch how we react, to be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. And then verse 21 says, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. If we allow things to get us upset, then we're not going to be very good samples as first fruits. Anyway, that'll give you plenty to think about for today, and I want you to think about it. I want you to consider those things. Remember that we are an extension of the first fruits that James talked about, removed by some time, but the same harvest. I mean, this is all one big crop, and we're not at the end of it yet, because if we were, we'd be out of here. So we're still to be examples, just as James was, just as the people he's writing to are, to remember the goodness of God and the wonderful things he's done for us, and how we can be the best examples of his gospel, and be quick to hear, listen to people, slow to speak, and just we're going to get to it, but be doers of the word and not hearers only. But remember that doesn't do any good to get angry, because the wrath of man does not fulfill the will of God. So anyway, focus on those things. Have a wonderful day. Remember to just rejoice and give God all the honor and glory and praise he deserves for the wonderful things he does for us every day, and try not to focus on the negative. Let's all do something good with what God has done for us. All right, God bless you all.